Hello, and welcome to this next video in our Genesis series. And today we're going to be looking at Genesis chapter 10 again, verses 6 through 20 this time, as we look at the descendancy of Ham. And so we're going to look at the scriptures first, and then look into some of Josephus's writings and some of other historical material and maps, and kind of try to put it all together. And so this is the first time we've overlapped the same chapter with multiple videos. So we did a entire video, Genesis 10, of the whole chapter, talking about it in the context of this book from Dr. Nathaniel Jeanson. Again, the book is traced, and it's very interesting. And he studies the DNA of a number of records of, and then various actual individuals from different parts of the world, and then he overlaps that or overlays that with some great deep dive into the history of migration patterns throughout known history of different cultures and groups and nations that migrated to different places at different times based on historical facts that we know of from different wars and different shifts of populations at different times. And so it's really quite fascinating, and you might be actually tremendously surprised, because a lot of people think they come from a particular son of Noah, Shem, Ham, or Japheth, and you might be quite wrong, at least on your father's side. Your father's side is the Y chromosome, which he traces which is a lineage that goes back to ultimately all the way to Noah, and then ultimately all the way back to Adam, and of course God creating Adam at the beginning of creation. We have, but the various branches from Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, actually, just because you think you have a European descent, and so you think, oh, I'm Indo-European, so I must be Japheth. Well, maybe not. Maybe on your mother's side, possibly, or your grandfather from your mother's side, possibly. But from your father's side, in other words, your father and his father before him, your grandfather, and so on and so forth, you could very easily be from Ham or Shem, and have this false notion that you've been from Japheth all along. And really, because of everything going on in the world, I don't necessarily recommend it, unfortunately. But if you do end up having your Y chromosome DNA tested, you need to get not just the 23andMe or some of the other cheap ones. You need to make sure it's a DNA test that actually tests specifically for the Y chromosome. And if you get that, you can't get it if you're a woman. You would need to have a direct male relative, like a brother or your father. You would have to have a male relative do it for you to get the Y chromosome to see your first fathers. But he goes and he traces all that and puts it together with all the migration patterns and the historical accounts, and you might be surprised. So you might have thought, oh, I'm from this all along, but really, maybe you are from your mother's side. You are from Japheth, or your grandfather on your mother's side, or your great grandfather maybe both great grandfathers on your mother's side. But on your father's side, you might actually be from Ham, or you might be from Shem. And from the research I've done, very, very strong evidence points to the fact that I might be actually from Shem rather than Japheth, which I thought all my life. And so it's a really eye-opening book, so if you're interested in that sort of thing, I'd highly recommend getting a copy and checking it out. And so today like I said, we're going to jump in. We did Japheth last time. He had 7 sons and 7 grandsons from those 2 of those 7 sons. Of course, they all had many more children than that, but the Bible records those 7 sons and 7 grandsons specifically because they are distinctive nationally and genetically. And so Ham, he actually has 24 sons. He has 4 sons. Sorry, 4 sons and 24 grandsons out of those 4 sons, and then 2 great grandsons. And of course, they all had many more children than that, but those are the ones that are distinctive nationally and genetically, that God, and spiritually, because God chose to put that specific descendancy into the Word of God. And so with Ham, again, we have 4 sons and 24 grandsons and 2 great grandsons. And so we're going to look at those today. So let's just jump right in. And then next time we will look at, of course, Shem. Okay, so let's just read it. Let's get started by reading it, and we'll look as we go here. It says, the sons of Ham, Cush and Mitzrayim, Put, and Canaan. And the sons of Cush, Seba and Havilah, Sabta and Rama and Sabteka, and the sons of Rama, Sheba and Dedan. So here's the great-grandsons right here, widely regarded to be the patriarchs of what we now know to be Saudi Arabia. Okay, but it's more complicated than that, so hold on. Okay, and then Cush begot Nimrod, and he became a mighty one on the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord, therefore it is said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. And the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, and Erech, and Akkad, and Calneh, in the land of Shinar. From that land he went forth into Assyria, and built Nineveh, and Reboeth-ir, and Calah, and Rezin between Nineveh and Calah, that is the great city. And Mitzrayim begot Ludhim, and Anahim, and Lahabim, and Naphtahim, and Pathrusim, and Caslusim, from which came the Philistines, and Caphtorim. And Canaan begot Sidon, his firstborn, and Heth, and the Jebusite, and the Amorite, and the Girgashite, and the Hivite, and the Archite, and the Sinite, and the Arvadite, and the Zemarite, and the Hamathite. And afterward the families of the Canaanite were spread abroad. And the territory of the Canaanite was from Sidon as you go toward Gerar, as far as Gaza, as you go toward Sodom and Gomorrah, and Admah and Zeboam, as far as Lasha. These are the sons of Ham, according to their families, according to their languages, by their lands, by their nations. Okay, so quite a bit more names here than we had to deal with Japheth. So we'll do our best, and Josephus did his best. So we'll take a look at what he had to say about how at his time, which was a little bit after the time of Jesus, during the time of the apostles, the original apostles, that's the time primarily that Josephus was writing in, he had all of these names, and he had a history. He had access to histories of, okay, here's where these people went and dwelt, here's where these people went and dwelt, and these people are now called this by the Greeks. And so a lot of the names that we have from our nations today are actually names from like the Greek and Roman times. And so to translate them back into the ancient times, before the Greek times, back into, let's say, Babylonian or pre-Babylonian times, that is what Josephus does for us. So he kind of bridges the gap between the modern day names of nations with the ancient names of the Table of Nations from Genesis 10. He bridges that gap for us to some degree. Now, Josephus is not canon, it's not scripture. So feel free to disagree with him. By all regards, he's fairly well renowned as a reliable and a well-reputed historian who didn't really have too much bias, because he was a Jew, but he was captured by the Romans. He had an interesting life story. He was kind of more of a secular Jew, so he didn't really have a lot of loyalty to Judaism or Israel. He was just kind of a you might say, somewhat agnostic or secular, in the sense that he wasn't some sort of religious zealot. He certainly was not. And so therefore, in his historical works, he doesn't really have a horse in the race. He's not trying to promote this group over that group. He's not trying to be ultra favorable towards the Jews or have any kind of bias necessarily. Of course, everybody has some biases. Even historians and the most objective amongst us have at least some biases. But he is widely regarded as a very accurate and non-biased, well-respected historian. And as such, he's done a great service because a lot of the Jews back at the time considered him a traitor because he was doing all this at the behest of Rome. And so, but like I said, he didn't really care. He was, again, much more secular than let's say religious Jews were. Okay, so with that said, let's look at what he has to say about Ham, and then we'll break it down with some other resources that we have here from some other historical references. And then this one, the Answers in Genesis people made an article, and they've kind of filtered the rough language, the hard to understand language from the English translation of Josephus's works, and they've kind of put a few helpers to guide us and let us know what some of those names mean. But let's start here with the raw, just the raw text of the English translation of Antiquities of the Jews from Josephus. Okay, so he says, here the children of Ham possessed the land from Syria and Amanus and the mountains of Libanus, seizing upon all that was on its seacoasts and as far as the ocean, and keeping it as their own. Okay, now here, let's take a look. I do have a map ready here, so just to give you an idea. Well, first of all, Syria, we all know where Syria is. It's still in the same place where it's always been. And then I did look up Amanus, and that can be seen here. Okay, so Amanus and then the mountains of Libanus. These are all things that, even though Josephus wrote this about 2,000 years ago, a little bit less than 2,000 years ago, we can still know where all of these geographies are. Okay, so if you go here, you can see that the Nur Mountains, mountains of holy light, formerly known as Alamadag, the ancient Amanus. Okay, so that's what he's talking about right there. Josephus is talking about the Amanus Mountains, and so that is the name that the Greeks gave them. Okay, so that's the Greek, and it's known medievally as Black Mountain or Jabal al-Lukam in Arabic. Okay, so it's, and here it's in south central Turkey, so you can see that that's where this is, the Nur Mountains. Now, we know where Syria is, so let's look at Libanus, because he also mentions here Libanus. So if you look this up, Libanus is really, it's Lebanon. That's what's talking about, Lebanon, Mount Lebanon, or Libanus. That's the ancient name. Okay, so if you look at Mount Lebanon and where that is, that's going again down the seacoast here. And so we know where Syria is, so let's just look at this on a map. So we can see, if we zoom out, and we see here, that right here is kind of this area of the Amanus mountains, and then they kind of, you can see this, just like we looked at Japheth, who was kind of up here last time, if you remember the maps that we looked at. Japheth was kind of originally here in northeastern Turkey, north central Turkey, and then western Turkey, kind of settled this way. And then as they kind of had a tendency to go towards the north and the west, that's why Japheth traditionally and historically is known to have generally gone and continued in that direction and populated the European continent. Okay, so notice that from Turkey, which is where the ark landed. Don't forget, the ark landed there in Mount Ararat in Turkey. You had Japheth kind of going here and going this way and western Turkey, and then over the years they just kind of kept branching out, and going through Europe. So now we're going to take a look at Ham. And so Ham, he started here, kind of in southern central Turkey, and went a little bit south, and those mountains, the Amanus Mountains, and Syria, this area right here, and then Libanus, the Lebanon Mountains, and then since they kind of came and they were like in this area right here, and they tended to go south, they kept doing that. And so the Canaanites dwelt here, which is now Israel, and they kind of dwelt in that direction. And then when they got here, they kind of split off. So some of them go to the Arabian Peninsula, and then some of them go more towards the African continent, and then from there, they fill in south from there. Okay, so just like Japheth kind of headed north and west, well, Ham kind of went south and then split in some different directions, kind of here to the Arabian Peninsula, and then, of course, the African continent going south from there. And so it's quite complicated, but let's get back to the text of Josephus, Antiquities of the Jews, and see what else he has to say. So this is kind of interesting here, because it says, some, indeed, of its names are utterly vanished away. In other words, just like with Japheth, we kind of like, well, this person married this person, they married into this geography in this region, and then they just kind of disappeared. Same thing happened with Ham. Okay, so some of the names are just kind of like, they got swallowed up in the bigger names from the tribe. Okay, so others of them changed, and another sound was given to them, and are hardly to be discovered. So in other words, he's basically saying the language has changed over the years, and different regimes and different empires came in, and they changed the way they said the names, and now it's hard to trace them back to their original sources. Okay, yet a few there are which have kept their denominations, in other words, their names. That's what denomination means, nom, from the word name, nom, like in Spanish, nombre. Okay, the denominations entire. Okay, so for of the four sons of Ham, time has not at all hurt the name of Cush. For the Ethiopians over whom he reigned are even at this day, both by themselves and by all men in Asia, called Cushites. Okay, so we know that the Cushites are Ethiopian. And so we know that from ancient times. But also, there's an interesting thing in my book, and I talk about this in my book Creations Week, and that is there is a name in Hebrew. There's a name for Kas and a name for Cush, and in Hebrew they're spelled exactly the same. So when you're studying about the four rivers, you'll see in some Bible translations it says, and this particular river that it's talking about, it says, this is the one that goes around the whole land of Kas, or Cush. And in some Bibles, it's automatically translated that to Ethiopia, which misleads people to think, oh, that might be the Nile River, and it's not. Okay, so I do a full treatment of that, and the issue is that word Kas in Hebrew is spelled exactly the same as Cush in Hebrew, but the interesting thing is where Kas is actually might be from the same people group, the same ancient people group. So if you look at it, notice that they're coming from, they're populating Syria, they're populating southern Turkey, and they kind of spread out a little bit this way and a little bit that way and into Syria, and then they start going south, and then they're kind of going in this region. So many of Ham's descendants actually spread out into this area, which is where the Kas actually comes from, because they're connected to the Persian Gulf with these rivers. Okay, it's the river Pishon, surrounding the whole land of Kas. And so, however, we know that Ethiopia, okay, modern day Ethiopia, notice it's right here. So, but it's not talking about the Nile River. It's talking about a river that's actually used to flow through the Arabian Peninsula. That's the Wadi Batin River, and it is dried up now, but it's activated. Parts of it are activated during heavy rains, and when that happens, it still exits right here at the Persian Gulf. But anyway, notice that Ethiopia is here, but keep in mind that Ethiopia was a mighty kingdom. Okay, back in the ancient times, it wasn't just this little country right here as it is in modern day Africa. It was like this entire region here was this giant kingdom of Ethiopia, Sudan, and it kind of had South Sudan, Ethiopia, which you see here, parts of Kenya, parts of Chad. This whole region was a giant empire known as Kush. And since then, it's split up, just like we talked about with Japheth, same thing. So we talked about like Gomer, and Gomer was, kind of like this large tribe that had children like Ashkenaz, and it was really part of Turkey, especially Western Turkey, but then it spread into Europe, ultimately all the way to Germany. And so at different times, it was like this giant empire like Prussia, and it was much bigger than it is today. So the exact same thing applies here. Nations have split off from their original giant empires, and so this all was in ancient times also known as Nubia, this kingdom here, which was Ethiopia, and now it's been split up into kind of multiple countries and geographies. Okay, so let's keep going. All right, so the memory of the Mesorites is preserved in their name, for all we who inhabit this country, meaning Judah, that's Josephus speaking, call Egypt Metzre, and that's from the word the Egyptians Metzreines, and in our Bibles in English it's called Mitzrayim, and the I am ending implies a plural, and that's because it was Upper and Lower Egypt. Okay, and then we also know that Put was also the founder of Libya, and called the inhabitants Puttites from himself. There is also a river in the country of the Moors which bears that name, whence it is that we may see that the greatest part of the Grecian historiographers mention that river in the adjoining country by the appellation of Put. But the name it has now has by change given it from one of the sons of Mitzrayim, who is called Libios. Okay, we will inform you presently what has been the occasion why it has also been called Africa. Okay, and then Canaan, the fourth son of Ham, inhabited the country now called Judea. So this is the whole promised land when Joshua leads them in to the promised land, and they go and they overthrow Jericho, and then they march into the land and they take over this whole region. But previously it was known as the land of Canaan, because that's where Canaan and his sons primarily dwelt in. Okay, and so the children of these four were these: Sabas, who founded the Sabians, we'll look at that in a minute; Evilas, who founded the Evilians. How would you like that to be your... That's funny, the Evilians. So that sounds funny to us in English, of course, but Getuli, Sabates founded the Sabathians. They are now called by the Greeks Astaborans. Sabtacus, called the Sabtecans, and Ragmus, the Ragmians. And he had two sons, the one of whom, Judatus, settled Judadians, a nation of the western Ethiopians. And, okay, so that's kind of like probably part of what led to Sudan. And left them his name, as did Sabas to the Sabians. But Nimrod, the son of Cush stayed and tyrannized at Babylon, and he's used as a prefigure or a type of Antichrist in Genesis 10 and 11, as we have already informed you. Now all the children of Mitzrayim, being 8 in number, possessed the country from Gaza to Egypt. Okay, so they settled there in Gaza, and then they continued to push on into Egypt, though it retained the name of only one, the Philistine, for the Greeks call part of that country Palestine. As for the rest, Ludisim and Nemim and Laban, who alone inhabited in Libya, and called the country from himself Nedim and Pathrusim and Caslosim and Caphtorim, we nothing of them besides their name, so we know nothing of them except for the name. Okay, for the Ethiopic war, which we shall describe hereafter, was the cause that those cities were overthrown. The sons of Canaan were these: Sidonius or Sidon, who also built a city of the same name, Sidon. It was called by the Greeks Sidon. Amathus inhabited Amathene, which is even now called Amath by the inhabitants, although the Macedonians named it Epiphanes, from one of his posterity. Arudeus possessed the island Aratus. Arucus possessed Acra, which is in Lebanon. But for the 7 others, Eusis, Chetusis, Jebusus, Amoris, Gergisus, Eudius, Sinuus, Samarius, we have nothing in the sacred books but their names, for the Hebrews overthrew their cities, and their calamities came upon them on the occasion following. Okay, so that's everything that Josephus has to say about it. So from this, I'm going to just help break that up for you. So here's the chart. So you have Cush, that's Ethiopia, but remember Ethiopia in a broader sense, not the way it is today. It covered a huge portion of the northern area of the continent of Africa. And then Mitzrayim in far North Africa, that's Egypt. And then Put in northwest Africa, that's Libya. And then Canaan, of course, that's where modern day Israel is now. Okay? And then, so these are the sons of Cush. And so from this branches off all kinds of interconnections of those countries that are now, Ethiopia, Sudan, Chad, etc. All that geography area, that's all of these sons right here. And then Sheba and Dedan are widely believed to be prominently figure in the population of what's now Saudi Arabia. Okay, so Egypt, the Egyptians, here they are: Ludhim, Anahim, Lahabim, Naphtahim, Pathrusim, Caslusim, from which came the Philistines. That's the very people that are still there in Gaza today, and the big war that's happening, and that hatred runs deep, and it goes back into these ancient times from long, long ago. Okay, and then of course, coming around from Canaan, many of these tribes got wiped out when the Israelites came and conquered the land. And then here in this document, again, you see the name of Cush is preserved in Egypt's hieroglyphic inscriptions as Cush, the name referring to the country that lay between the second and third cataracts of the Nile. This same land was later known as Nubia, as I already shared with you. And so there's more historical records about this. And here's a good map. That's why I have this one open. Okay, so you could see the Arabian Peninsula here, and you could see that this ancient map has many of these tribes interspersed. So some of these are from Shem. Here's the interesting part. So you notice that Joktan and Jobab and Havilah and Almadad and Hadoram and Shalef and Hazarmaveth and Jedoram and Jobab and all these, those were all peoples from Shem, not Ham. But notice how they're interspersed. Okay, so many of these are from Ham. So they're Ham's descendants. Now, as they started kind of overlapping and dwelling in relatively close proximity with each other, you can just guess what happened. So you can see that there's Havilah, they're real close. Here's Cush, and so settling and intermixing here. That's why it's really hard to say unless you follow Dr. Jeanson's work, and it's some of it's speculative, so we can't say for 100% sure. But if you accept it and you believe that it's legitimate, or mostly legitimate, as at least I believe it's mostly legitimate. Even his speculations are very well researched. And you get your DNA, your Y chromosome DNA tested. Yeah, you might think that you're from Ham, but you might be from Shem, and it's just that your physical characteristics come more from your mother's side, or your mother's grandfathers, and so on and so forth, from ancient times. And so therefore you have, you think you're a particular so-called race because you have these particular characteristics, but actually, if you go back and trace your father's line all the way back, you could be from Shem, actually, instead. So because Shem and Ham had a lot of close proximity in some of the ways that they settled, geographically speaking. And so it's interesting to think about all these things. And so you could see again here, there's the Red Sea in a close-up there. And you have Caphtorim and Naphtahim, Caslusim, and all these kind of right here on the Gaza Strip going this way into Egypt. And then, of course, Libya here. You see Put, that's Libya, and then Egypt kind of in this area right here. And so real interesting stuff. And you can come check this out. This is from creation.com. In this document that I'm referencing here. And so they have some interesting things, some diagrams, and a lot of historical stuff. I'm not going to take you through every last little bit of it. You can come look at it on your own if you're that interested in it. But here, the Answers in Genesis people basically take Josephus's work and they break it down and make sure that we know what's what. So like Cush here, and then again Mitzrayim is what it's called in our Bibles. Metzre is what they called it in Egypt or in Israel. Put, founder of Libya. And Libya is an interesting one because you have Put, but you also have some of the people who came from Mitzrayim, Egypt, who settle in the area of Libya. So it's kind of mixed. So just, it's not necessarily that everyone from Libya is from Put. You could actually be from Mitzrayim because the Egyptian patriarch and his children settled in the Egypt area, but also they intermixed with the people from Put. And it makes sense too because especially at the beginning, you did have a lot of family ties, and you had like Put and Mitzrayim, their brothers, their children are cousins, and as their children's children, are second cousins and so on. You can imagine that as they started settling in all these geographies, some of them probably settled together. They went and they kind of joined up with each other and as family groups, and okay, your sons and daughters marry my sons and daughters, and we're gonna have this community here. So you can easily imagine that kind of thing happened prominently. Okay, and then so Canaan, the fourth son of Ham. Don't forget, back to our Genesis 9 teachings, that remember that Canaan is the son actually that's cursed, and it's the son, Canaan is the son that's cursed by Noah because he's the offspring of this egregious sin, and he goes and he settles and dwells in the very land that God had set aside foreordained for Israel. And so when Israel comes and overthrows the Canaanites, that's part of that curse playing out. Okay, so and then if you want to look all these up, like Sabas, Seba, who founded the Sabians, I looked up some of these. Okay, so the Sabians founded the kingdom of Sabah. And so you can see here, again, the same place where some of the children of Shem dwelt. You see that some of the children of Ham dwelt in the same place. So there was intermixing. Okay, and so you can see that right here, the Sabians, and they go back to like 1200 BC, and of course that's roughly 1,000 years, more or less. That's 1,000 some odd years after the flood, and after they all kind of started migrating and settling into their different geographies, and coming into their own as various empires and kingdoms and nations and whatnot. And so you could see there's an example of Sabah, Sabians, there. And then if we go back, I think I looked up a couple of these that interested me. Sabians, the Astaborans, yeah. Let's see, let's find that one. Where did that one go? I must be missing it. Okay, Laban. I'll find it in a minute. Okay. Oh, there it is. Okay. So the Sabbathis founded the Sabbathines. They are now called by the Greeks Astaborans. So if you go see, like, if you search on this, you're not going to get any records other than biblical, ancient stuff. So that's why Josephus does this work. So he basically connects the ancient names to the more modern Greek or Roman names. Okay, so the Astaborans. So if you search on that, you'll find it's the northeastern Sudanic languages. And so notice that. So the Astaborans, and then you have some migration patterns here based on a war, and the Sudanic languages. And let's just look at this. Notice the northeastern Sudanic, eastern Sudanic, and Sudanic or Astaboran languages may form a primary division of the proposed Eastern Sudanic family. They are characterized by having, in the first person singular pronoun, as opposed to the Southeastern Sudanic languages. So there was a split here with language, and that's another interesting aspect of Jeanson's work, is that he also looks at some of the language splits. So oftentimes a DNA genetic split and a migration split also was coupled with a language split, and we know, of course, the original language split was from Babylon. But notice this: as time opposed the Southeastern Sudanic languages, which have an in, Naima has yet to be conclusively linked to other languages and would appear to be the closest relative to the ex-Sudanic rather than the ex-Sudanic proper. The most well-known language of this group is Nubian, according to Cloud Riley. The ancient Meroitic language appears on limited evidence to be closely related to the languages of this group. Okay. Now, since we're just doing, I don't mind using Wikipedia when we're just doing kind of overview generic stuff. If you wanted to dig deeper into this, I would definitely check the sources and dig deeper. But it is interesting to see these relationships and to see that when you get these when you get the ancient names and connect them to the more modern names based on the Greek or the Roman, then you can look them up and you can look at the histories and then connect it back to Genesis chapter 10. And so you could do this with all these. It would be way too long because there's too many grandsons of Ham to do every single one in one video. But I'm just pointing you in the right direction. And if you want to go research it further, You can go through the whole thing, and it's pretty interesting. So let's also look at one other thing. I wanted to look at this aspect here. It's interesting, if you look in certain Bible translations, you'll see this, that when we get to the same list, you see this is the same list as the genealogies, Genesis 10, which start from Adam and go through Noah, and then Shem, Ham, and Japheth. But if you go and you look at this one like Ham, notice it says the same thing. And this is exactly the same, a direct quote from Genesis chapter 10. The sons of Ham were Cush, Mitzrayim, Put, and Canaan. But now look at this. This is a direct quote also from Genesis 10. The sons of Cush were Seba, Havilah, Sabta, Rama, and Septeka. And the sons of Rama, Sheba, and Dedan. Okay, same exact thing. And then Cush begot Nimrod, and he began to be a mighty one on the earth. Okay, same exact thing as Genesis 10. And Mitzrayim became the father. But this is interesting, because you'll notice this. Notice the I am ending in Hebrew indicates a plural. So Mitzrayim, you can imply that Mitra was his actual name. And Mitzrayim is the people that came from him. In other words, like, you might think of, I'm myself am from El Paso, so I'm known as an El Pasoan, an El Pasoan. And so you might think of somebody else from a different place, like Texas, so I'm from Texas, so I'm a Texan. Or if you're from New Mexico, you might be called a New Mexican. And but there's other ways of looking at that, and other types of suffixes that you might give to that. For instance, in New York, you don't call a New York a New Yorkan. You call them a New Yorker. So you see there's differences, because the suffix doesn't go well with the name. So you have to find a suffix that'll fit the name. So you say New Yorker, you don't say a New Yorkan or a New Yorkite, stuff like that. And so that's what this is. So this I am ending here. If you go back here to Genesis, you'll notice that it gives the names in terms of the people groups, not the names of the patriarch. So notice here in Genesis 10:13, it says Mitzrayim begot Ludhim, Anahim, Lehabim, Naphtahim, Pathrusim, and Caslusim, from which came the Philistines, and Caphtorim. So notice these names, Ludhim, meaning a people group, not a person. Anamim, meaning a people group, not a person. But the people group came from a person, and the person's name is Lud. Okay, and so you actually see that here in First Chronicles. Notice this, that this exact same passage, Mitzrayim begot Ludhim and Anahim, Lehabim, Naphtuhim, Pathrusim, Caslusim, from which came the Philistines, and Caphtorim. Well, if you go here and you look at this, you'll see that Mitzrayim begot the people of Lud. So it doesn't say Ludim. In other words, it's giving you their actual patriarchal names now. So the man's name was actually Lud, and Anam, not Anahim, Lahab, not Lahabim, Naphtu, not Naphtuhim. So the I am ending indicates the people group from which they came from: Pathrus, Caslus, and Caphtor. Okay, so the people that came from Caphtor are Caphtorim, and the people that came from Caslu are Casluhim, which are the Philistines. And so, it's just interesting to see that. And you can just kind of see, if we look at this map again, you can just kind of, again, see, you're gonna see this, that they started in Turkey, a large group, okay, of course, traveled east, and they found a land in the plain of Shinar, which is Iraq, which is this area right here, Iraq and Iran, the Persian Gulf. So they found a plain of land of Shinar, and they built a tower and dwelt there at Babylon. So where is this? This right here, actually it's underwater now, but right here is the Garden of Eden. Eden is this area right here. And so notice what they did. God drove them out of the place of rebellion, Eden. That's where Satan fell, that's where man fell, that's where all the trouble started. And so God drives them out of that place. And at the flood, he puts them all the way up here in Turkey. And then, once they come to Turkey, what do? Well, a large group travel east and go to Babylon, and they go right back to the place of rebellion. That's where they go. They go back to the place of rebellion, and then God separates them and drives them out from there. And what do some of them do? Well, some of them, go and they inhabit eastern Turkey, northern Turkey, central Turkey, and eastern Turkey, and then as they migrate down through the centuries, they end up in Europe. Some of them are starting here in central Turkey and southern Turkey and along the coast of Lebanon here and in Canaan, which became Israel. And so they're dwelling here, and then as the years go by, they end up going into Arabian Peninsula, into the African continent, and they start developing and settling all of this territory and building that empire. Okay, so next time we're going to look at Shem. And what does Shem do? Well, Shem is kind of like right here, and Shem is primarily the one that goes east and starts pushing eastward and filling in all of these nations. And from there's a huge group that starts migrating into Asia and eventually makes it all the way to China and other areas, even going on into the Americas. And that's one of the most fascinating things about this book, is he has a tremendous link between Shem and the Native Americans, and their DNA is very connected and linked back to each other, because they're part of the ones who went as far east as you can go. In other words, they went so far that they ended up on the west. They went so far east they ended up west, what we would call west today, in the Americas. Okay, so we'll look at all that next time. I hope you enjoyed this session of our Genesis series, going over the Table of Nations and how all these things came to be, both scientifically, genetically, which we can trace back through the genetic research that's been done, but also historically and linguistically and geographically through the histories that we know of from Josephus and others. And so it's interesting to know all this, but remember that it absolutely does not matter where you come from, nationally, geographically, if you want to say it racially or whatever. It doesn't matter where you come from. If you are a human being, then you are entitled and able to avail yourself of the gospel through the blood of Jesus Christ. And so you don't want to be associated with the blood of your forefathers, even though it is interesting to look at how the biblical narrative shows a correct record of how things played out historically. And that's the reason I'm interested in it. But you shouldn't be interested in your bloodline from Adam to Noah to Shem, Ham, and Japheth. You should be interested in the bloodline that connects you back to God. And the bloodline that connects you back to God is Jesus Christ. And that's the only bloodline that matters. And so what would be really interesting is to trace your spiritual genealogy back to Christ and the apostles, and which apostle was it that evangelized which region, and those people became Christians and shared it with their children and evangelized other people. And it sure would be interesting to see our spiritual genealogy, as it were, how the gospel went forth through the nations to different people groups at different times, and eventually passed down and made it to us, and we accepted it ourselves. So that's the more important genealogical record that we should ultimately care about. So, and maybe we'll get to find out, trace our, I think that'll be really cool to go back and trace our spiritual genealogy through all the evangelism that happened down through the centuries, down through the ages. So anyway, praise God. Pray that this message blessed you and edified you, and we'll see you here, there, in the air, or in the next video. God bless you.